All right. Well, we are getting started with yet another expert webinar on our monthly webinar series. Marnie, I don't know about you, but here we are in, is it month six or seven pandemic months? I mean, it's all blending together to me. So I ultimately just keep learning in front of my computer. That's what's happening in my world. How about you?
Absolutely. This is all of my interactions are right here now. So it could be a weekday, it could be a weekend, which is why I need some help with project management.
Oh my gosh. Are you not excited for today's topic? I think
Totally.
any teacher, not just in education, but in everything we do, life is a project in so many ways. Even if you're planning your child's birthday party, that can be a project, especially in a pandemic time. It's like, well, there's a whole different way to think about things. So we are so excited, folks, that you are here and joining us. And don't worry, we've got all of this. It's going to be recorded and on our YouTube channel. So feel free to just enjoy today's presentation with Professor Loy and Professor Dilts. You all are in for a treat. If you don't know what Agile method is, the Agile method, you are going to find out right quickly that you're doing it anyway, right, Marnie? As a teacher, yeah, we're all Agile. It's really
Yeah.
what it's cut out to be is to be agile and flexible and nimble and pivot, all those words that we've been getting to know very well recently, right?
Yes, and boy, teachers sure can not only use this, they're already doing it, but they may not have an organized way of thinking about it, but they really need to help teach their students how to be organized and manage their own projects. So probably one of the most important skills before content.
Amen to that. So this presentation is really about the business world meeting the technology world and giving you some really tangible tools to use in your classroom. We're excited to get started. So let's get started using gamification to teach teamwork. You're going to hear some other comments as well, or terms like agile and project management. But really, if you boil right down to it, it's using a game to teach teamwork. So that is nothing more than, I would say, K-12 education in a nutshell. So let's get going and introduce our special guest today. We are Canyon Professional Development. We come to you live from GCU, lots of homes around the Valley of the Sun. We're Canyon Professional Development PD with purpose. And my name is Corey Araza. I am your host today. I'm the Director of STEM Outreach. I have 17 years plus teaching in the public school classroom and computer systems, ESL, Spanish, and STEM integration. You can find me at C Araza on Twitter. And I also have Marnie Landry with me as well. We're going to introduce her later as she starts to ask some good questions about project management. She's excellent in the area of project-based learning, which is also very helpful as it comes to project-based learning. But right now, let me introduce to you Professor Rob Loy. Rob, if you don't mind, Professor Loy, would you jump on and introduce yourself here and then maybe pass the baton over to Professor Glenda Dilts?
Thanks, Corey. As mentioned, my name is Rob Loy. I'm the Director of Non-Degree Programs here at Grand Canyon. These are programs designed for students that maybe are not ready to go to a four-year degree or have a four-year degree and are looking to maybe re-career into something else. And my background is 22 years in IT in various management areas. Also been teaching in the computer information system for 18 years and 2 years here at Grand Canyon. I am PMP certified, which is the Project Management Professional Institution. One of the hardest tests I think I've ever taken in my life was to get certified. And I do guest speak on various topics, including Agile project management. And you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can use my email address. I do have a quote. It's an older quote from Winston Churchill, and let our advanced worrying become advanced thinking and planning. And I know I'm going for my doctoral program right now, and when I see my things that are due, I'm already worrying about how am I going to get to that project? How am I going to get it completed? So I think stop worrying and let's start planning. And that's really what Agile or project management in general is all about. So that's me. Let's turn it over to Glenda.
Hi, I'm Glenda Dilts. I started in project management in construction many years ago at the beginning of the cell phone breakthrough, when we were trying to build 40 plus cell phone sites a year. So that was the bulldozer was the big limit there. We only had one, and we had to get it to a different site every week, and that was a challenge. I have also managed projects for government entities and for individuals, and I've taught project management for multiple universities. And I'm with Rob working on a DBA right now, and this is my contact information. As project managers, we're often concerned with getting things done on time and within budget. Agile moves the focus. Agile says delivering an on-time project that doesn't meet the need wastes everyone's time and money. So with Agile, we're more focused on meeting the need and less focused, although they still matter, on the money and the time. So today, we're going to look at becoming familiar with Agile methodology illustrated by a game project. We're going to look at 3 strategies that let you develop projects efficiently and rapidly by tracking the requirements, implementing stories using iterations, and testing our results.
Thank you so much, Professor Dilts and Professor Loy. Wow, we are among greatness here. Both of you working on your doctorates right now. This is exciting to know, and also exciting because you're students. So you're not just talking the talk, but you're walking the walk, and I imagine you have to do some project planning as a student as well. I happen to know that drill. Carol Lippert, my fearless leader who's just said hello, she and I are both in the doctoral program, and so after this, Carol, we are going to get some tips and tricks on how to make our doctoral programs feel a little bit more manageable, right?
That's what I'm hoping. I'm here listening, all ears.
Thank you so much. And then we're going to evaluate this webinar and you'll earn a PD certificate. So Professor Dilts, onward and upward.
Okay, so why does Agile matter to you? I've already told you that it matters to project management in shifting the focus to the actual results from the time and the money. But you are already using Agile methodology when you use formative assessment. What you do is you say, these are the things that I need my students to be able to do. And then you use your formative assessment to see whether or not they're doing them. And then you loop back around and say, either I'm going on to the next thing, or I have to redo some things to make sure that we get this part right. And so we move on. And we iterate if we need to. We go on when we're ready to. So across organizations, Agile is being used in some form or fashion. Our advisory board and our hiring leaders at Grand Canyon University are asking us to deliver students with experience in Agile. Our CSET students use Agile tools and techniques early and often in their courses for their project-based learning, and you are also in project-based learning with your students. So this is not something strange, something different. This is where you are right now.
Can't be more specific than that to teachers. Thank you, Professor Dilts.
Okay, so what do we do with Agile? With Agile, we understand user needs through user stories. We ask the users what it is that they need to be able to do. And then we prioritize those stories to get them a working prototype. And then we implement those stories with iterations. We can't do everything at once. And you tell your students that same thing. We can't sit down and write this entire research paper. There are some steps that we need to go through. So we need to evaluate our task difficulty. We need to evaluate our task importance. And then we assign those tasks to members of the team, and we complete our tasks using iterations. But then we get to the formative assessment. We validate our results and processes in a retrospective, and we make updates then based on those validations, whether those validations are true or false.
Sounds like it seems easier than maybe it is. Could that be the case?
That's true. A lot of things sound easier than they are, Corey. I've been doing this a long time. I can make it sound really easy.
Right, but when it comes down to it, now in education, we really focus on educational theory in each one of our webinars to make sure that, well, what does this have to do with the 3R model, for example? The 3R model being the relationships, relevance, and rigor. If you have those three, students are really focusing in all three of those areas and moving forward. So how does Agile support this 3R model?
Okay, Agile is a project management technique that focuses tightly and highly on relationships. In an ideal world, and we all know that that's not always the case, but an Agile team is together and stays together not only throughout a project, but across projects, so that that team becomes tightly knit. That team becomes aware of their various strengths and weaknesses, and becomes aware of how they work and how they work together. So relationships are vital in Agile. And then with our user stories, we are tracking exactly what's relevant to our users. What do they need? And everything is tightly tied to remaining relevant. And we understand in Agile project management that sometimes what we think we want is not what we really want. And Agile is flexible. We look at what we really want at every iteration, and we say, okay, is this still what you want? And are we still doing the right thing? And is there something else that's more important here? Because often our users don't really know what we're able to deliver for them. And when they see the things that we're delivering to them, they say, oh, wow, if you can do that, can you do this? And very often we can. And so we maintain that relevance throughout the life cycle of our project. And our rigor is also vital. And we do the testing after each iteration to say, does this meet the need? And we ask our users, does this meet the need? It's not up to us to say that it does. It might meet what we think the need is, but they are the ones that actually have the need. So yes, this 3Rs fits perfectly into an Agile methodology.
That's awesome. So that's just that relevance across, from K-12 into post-secondary education and into the industry. So thank you for that explanation. So tell us about the fun stuff we're going to do today. We're going to build a game.
We are. Now, we're not going to build the whole game today. Rob and I have this project that we present to students, and we have presented it to high school students where they go through this multi-loop process of actually creating something to do. Now, this is a computer game simulation. You are not going to build a computer game, and we have talked to you already about the need to have a piece of paper and a pencil so that you can participate in an abbreviated version of this exercise.
Sounds great. Okay.
Now, a project is a temporary undertaking to create a certain product, service, or result. A project is not repeatable. There's no need to do a project twice. If we are building something, once it's built, it's built. So it's not a product. And so then project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to those project activities to meet the project requirements. And so you can see how what we've talked about in Agile just kind of flows right in there. So Agile uses iterative processes to deliver priorities quickly and lets the project deliverables adapt changes. So our employers, potential employers of our college students, are asking for Agile knowledge. So we have built Agile tools and techniques into our courses early on, just like we've built project-based learning into our courses early on.
That is fantastic news. Thank you so much, Professor Dilts. Now, I think we're going to take this opportunity I'm going to stop share, and then Professor Loy is going to start sharing his screen. And in the meantime, y'all can grab a pen and paper. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So let's go ahead and have Professor Loy start to share his screen. And folks, go ahead and grab a pen and paper. And if you want to get crazy, you can always use your Jamboard or something, some sort of other pen and paper, which is computer based. And Marnie, I know that you're a project-based learning guru. Any tips or tricks before we move right into what Professor Loy is going to teach us?
Well, just one, you will be graded. So don't, just because your video is not on doesn't mean you can hide from this assignment. I have my pen and paper too, so you get yours. Number two, that was really critical. I never thought of it the way you just said it, Professor Dilts, about we're not making a product. It's not about the product, it's the project. I think that was pretty, that was a clarifying moment for me. I think I conflate the two. So thank you. That's really got me thinking.
So I think we're about ready to get started again. You think we should give another 30 seconds, Corey, or should we go ahead and get moving?
I've got mine. I think that was plenty, and Marnie already told them they were going to be graded, so I'm sure that kicks into the gear right now. So go right ahead and tell us what are we doing?
Okay, well, so we've been teaching, or I've been teaching in computer and science industry, or field for quite a while. And a lot of times students get to practice something that they don't fully understand. So Professor Dilts and I kind of came up with a way to take a concept that they kind of live and breathe in their creating projects from a IT perspective, and turned it into something that's a little more manageable and maybe a little more fun. Originally, this was designed for them to actually build a town out of construction paper and tape and pencils and staplers and all that kind of fun stuff. But talking to students, they like the idea of a game. So we wanted to convert it over to something that kind of resonates with people that would be interested in an IT field. So we took a side-scrolling game and we are going to turn it into an agile learning opportunity. So this is what it could look like. This isn't what it has to look like, but let's go ahead and see how they get to that final piece of it. So when you have a project, you sit down and you think of all the different things that you're going to need. And I kind of referenced my DBA papers that are due. And you sit down and go, these are all the things that I have to do to complete this particular project or this particular task. So you just list them all. And what you're seeing here is a mock-up of a Trello board. And we're going to show you here Trello in just a second. But a Trello board allows you to kind of manage the different tasks that go into it. So the very first column in a Trello board or in project management is what are all the different pieces that I need to complete. And you'll actually see I have one here with a red highlighted, which we'll talk about in just a second. But as these projects or these stories get completed, they work their way through the Trello board. So let's just use an example of a reward. These are all the things we need to do. During one of those iterations or those loops that Professor Dilts mentioned, we might move reward over into our priority for something we need to work on for our sprint. And as we work on it, we'll move it over to work in progress. Then we'll move it over to testing. And when it's complete, it'll be over on the far right-hand side. The goal is to get as many of these backlog items through the process and to complete it. So whether you're a student working on a project, maybe for a semester-based thing, or you're a teacher working on something to kind of maybe a project that you're trying to get ready for the students, by breaking it down into its user stories, its individual tasks, and watching as it moves through the progress, you can kind of stop worrying about where you are and have a very visual representation of what it looks like. Now, what does a Trello board look like? So this is Trello.com. I'm hoping you all can see this right now. What it is it's a website that you can go to that allows you to track tasks. So I think I only have four swim lanes here right now. I have my to-do, which is my backlog. I have my stuff that I'm working on. I have stuff that I'm testing, and things that are to complete. And what's nice about this is it's dynamic. This happens to be a website, so you can kind of drag things across as they move through the list to get over here. And if you wanted to add another one, you could add another one. Let's see, what would I add in here? Let's go ahead and maybe make one called waiting. Waiting here. And maybe that would be the second one. So these are things that are waiting to get action. So they're a priority, but I haven't actually started working on them. So that would kind of match the Trello board you showed. But if you can take any project you have, break it down into the individual pieces like user stories, and then keep track of this, it really allows you to organize it. And all that worrying that you had about starting a project and how you're going to get through it becomes a lot less worrying because you put a lot of planning into the front piece of it. So hopefully that explains the benefit of a Trello board, or what we how we would measure our progress through it. But we're going to use this for an example right now for our project. So for our game, these are some of the things we think we would need to create. This may come from our business owners or from our customers of various pieces. But this one right here, let's go ahead and focus on that, and let's go to our next slide here. Let's go ahead. So that paper and pencil that you have, hopefully you've all played a video game at some level and you got to use a control stick or a control pad or whatever it happens to be. What I want you to do is just draw one on a piece of paper and think of all the things that you would normally interact with that controller. So you notice that some have little pads, some have buttons, some have a lot of buttons, some don't, some just the old Atari 2600 for those that were around in the 80s, one joystick and one button was the way they were. So I'm going to give you a minute here to go ahead and draw something out. You might want to label your buttons for maybe what kind of things that those buttons would do. If not, just make sure you have enough buttons for how you think we would play the game. And we're going to test your creativity and your thoughtfulness that goes into your controller in a few slides when we actually try to make our player go from the left-hand side of our screen to the right-hand side. So we'll give you a minute there.
So Rob, as I do this, I don't have to follow any rules, right? I don't have to
Nope.
try to recreate one that I already had. My imagination is what controls this, right?
No, and that's actually a pretty important part about what happens from an Agile perspective is that, we have user stories. So we try to put as much thought as we can into that user story. So in this case, to develop a game controller would be the user story. When it gets to the person who has to do the work, it's kind of up to them to interpret that the way it needs to. And what happens sometimes is they miss the ball. So the Agile lets them catch on to it going, hey, this isn't what I needed. Let's go back and clarify our user story. So yeah, at this point you can use your imagination, and there's no right or wrong answer because we're going to test it before we complete this whole thing, and then we can go back to the drawing board. Although we're not going to send you back to the drawing board because we have a limited amount of time for what we need to do. Great observation, great question. Give you another couple seconds here, and
Thank you,
again,
Rob. So we're just drawing right now. I'm drawing my own controller here, folks. And think of those crazy things that even if you're not playing video games a whole lot, and maybe someone in your house, my 16-year-old son, which hopefully he's not doing that right now while he's supposed to be in school, but I really don't know. But think about those things that maybe he or she is complaining about, like, oh, one thing, my kid, his hands are always sweaty after he talks, after he's games, and he comes over and starts patting them. I'm like, gross, man. So I'm thinking of that kind of weird stuff. Is that okay too?
Yeah, that's actually, the more creativity you put into this, the more options you will have when we actually get to test it. And I will admit, I'm probably more of the joystick and one button, because when you start adding multiple buttons, it becomes really complicated for the brain to figure out what button to click next. But games require all those different actions. There's a lot of different things that happen in it. So put some thought into it, and we'll be good.
So sweaty hands, how pedestrian. Mine was a fireball button, so.
That just goes to show you how Marnie and I think a little differently.
All right, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, let's go ahead and go on to this stuff. So again, this is a project that we're trying to teach students or anyone how Agile works. So we use terminology that you would expect to hear from an Agile meeting. You heard me already mention user stories. User stories are where you kind of break down those components and figure out what do I need to do. So from our game perspective, one such user story might be, as a player, I should be able to encounter obstacles. So moving through the game is a challenge. So you don't want to just be able to push hold down the right button and have the guy just go from left to right. That would be way too easy. So we need to, as a player, have some things that stop them and make it a little more of a challenge. So these would be the kind of things that would be presented. If you're working on it from, let's say we're going back to our DBA paper. As a writer, I need to be able to cite my sources. As a writer, I need to have graphs that I can put into my my paper. I need to have all the different things that would need to go into into it, you could write the stories that go along with it. So these are some stories that we're going to kind of follow through with this project. If we were doing this, we would run this whole project for about 45 minutes with high school students or other people, and they would actually spend a little more time, and we'd go a little more in depth on some of these pieces of it. So, okay, so now here's our Trello board. We're starting to make some decisions based on what's going on. So you've already done your player controls, but we have not tested it. So it's sitting over here in our fourth swim lane for review and testing because we have not completed it. We don't know if it's going to work. But our business owner or our project leader has declared that for us to really see how we're going to do this, we need to move some things to the top of the list. We need to develop a character. We need to develop backgrounds for the character to move on, and we want to have a villain that that character needs to meet. In a normal project, the students would actually be making these. They would draw them on paper and either cut them out, or if you remember my drawing, they were torn out because not everybody is allowed to play with scissors. But these are ones that we would prioritize. The students would then grade it because not all tasks are the same. Some are easier than other ones, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that I could spend 10 minutes on this one and an hour on that one. And then you can figure out, do I want to work the hard ones first or the easy ones? I mean, we could debate that all day, whether you get rid of the hard ones so you can feel better or do the easy ones so you can get a quick win. But the students would grade it. So in this case, we said, okay, making this player with the little legs and arms is going to be pretty hard to make. Let's go ahead and make a background, which you don't see over here, and a villain and items. So we would score them, which would give the person participating some understanding of how long they think it would take to do that. Notice I have iteration number 1 down here because we didn't create all the items in the backlog. We only took a subset of them. So we're going to have multiple loops, and we're going to test these various pieces as we go. The next thing is the student actually would go ahead and create these items. So they have paper and markers and scissors or whatever they have to do to make those 3 items for their particular game. We would give them a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, to go ahead and do it and put some effort into it. But they would actually be hands-on participating. So we don't have time to do that. We did your hands-on with your particular game controller. The other thing that comes up with an agile understanding is this repetitive nature of making sure we are making progress towards our goals. So we have this thing called a daily stand-up that we get the team together and we ask them 3 questions, and they're very similar to this. They might not be exact, but for ours, what did you work on in the last 5 minutes? If you're doing this for work, it'd be what you work on in the last day. But we want to know that what kind of things did they complete, and we want to know what they're going to work on next. So in our particular experience, what they're going to work on next would be our next iteration. They might not know what the priorities are, so they might not be able to answer that. And then this is a very important piece of what happens from Agile, and this is what allows it to be a lot more efficient than some of the other project management methodologies, is we ask them for what kind of impediments or roadblocks that they ran into and what help they need. Now in our daily stand-up, we wouldn't necessarily solve these problems. We would just make note of what kind of roadblocks and impediments there were, and then outside that meeting, as a project leader or as a teacher or person working on the projects, you would then go try to fix those or at least minimize the impact they're going to have on the various pieces. But every day, every sprint, everything we're going through, we're repeating this process. We're making the people accountable to the tasks that they're working. So going back to my DBA paper again, every morning that when I have time to work on my paper, I'm like, what did I work on yesterday? Let's go ahead and make sure I understood what I did. And here's what I'm going to work on today. And what did I run into roadblocks? Oh, maybe I couldn't find the article that I needed to find. But this happens probably in your daily life more than you realize. It's just more of a standard process that goes into it. So here's where we're going to start testing our game. So we asked them to do a background, a player, and a villain. We would lay these out in a pattern here so we can start seeing what our game looks like. If we only made one background, one player, and one villain, they might all be on one screen. But you can start seeing how we now can present something to the end user. If this is a draft of your paper or a draft of your project or something you wanted to run by as a test case with a project you're working on or some kind of lesson you're working on, you could run it past at this point. There's something visually that you can understand or something that you can you can test on. So there's nothing actually to test. beyond the fact that everything lays out on your page. So that would be the end of our iteration number 1. And you can see now that those characters, background, and villains have moved across our Trello board. We didn't actually stop in work in progress. There should have been one more stop in there, but they're over here and completed now because our character was able to be displayed, our background was displayed, and our villain, and we're moving now into iteration number 2 with some new priorities. So we took some items out of our backlog, moved them into a priority, which is our sprint, and we're going to move these through here. We still haven't tested your controller, so keep it near you because we're going to get to it shortly. So in this iteration, now we're on iteration number 2. We're going to score them again. You'll notice similar. It's exactly the same thing we did in the first iteration. And that's what gives it a comfort level, because you know how each of these sprints and loops or iterations is going to go. So it's not something new you have to learn. It's just learning how to do the pieces for the actual stories that you're working in. We would have them build it again. Again, we're back in iteration number 2. We would do our stand-up again, ask them what they worked on, what are they going to work on next, what impediments and roadblocks. Hopefully, we fixed or minimized the impediments and roadblocks we had from iteration number 1, and we have new ones, or hopefully we don't have any, but if we do have some new ones, they're new, not just a repetition of the previous ones. So hopefully we're making progress on that piece. And now our game becomes even a little more advanced. Now we have a player, we have accessories, we have obstacles, and this is where we're going to start testing. We're going to want to see if you have the buttons and the actions to allow your player to get from this side all the way across all these pieces, all the way to the villain, and actually get past the villain into the back end side. So we would go through a couple more iterations if we were doing this for a project. I think we run through 4 or 5 iterations, having them add these various pieces as they go, more backgrounds, more villains, more obstacles, more accessories, more rewards, all that kind of fun stuff that goes into it. And now our Trello board, we got a couple things still left here. We got rewards and dialogue, our controller, which we still haven't tested, and all the stuff is moved over here. And the iteration process, and this is where I'll bring Professor Dilts back in to kind of talk about some of this iteration, but you can see that you start at your project is always going to have a starting point and an end point, as Professor Dilts mentioned. But what happens from an iterative process, this agile process, is we go through these repetition circles in each of our sprints. We get the information, so we had the question about what do I need to design? Well, that's part of the design process for this iteration. We need to build it and we need to test it. Build it, design, build, test over and over again. So Professor Dilts, you have any more detail you want to share about the iteration process?
Well, very often in what we've called structured project management or standard project management, like when we were building cell sites, we could not build the bottom half of the cell site and then say, oh, you know what, wait a minute, let's look at this and let's change that and make the top half different. We needed to plan the whole site before we got started because we were building a physical piece. But in Agile project development, very often we're not doing physical things. When we build a video game, it's not physical. We can play it, but we can move things around and we can change things more easily than we can take off the top floor of a building and change the way we're going to do that. So that allows us to be sensitive to the needs of our owners of our project and our users of our project. So we don't try to get all of the design stuff done first in an Agile project. Everything still has to be designed before we can build it. Of course it does. But we don't try to get all that done up front because we are aware that the design might change. And by trying to design everything up front, we may waste our time and our money and not get something that we're actually going to end up with. So we are designing in sections, we're building in sections, we're testing in sections, and then we're moving on. So that's where we kind of diverge from a more structured project management scenario.
And there's a question just came through chat about why we have these dots here versus the straight line. And what I'm trying to get to is we don't know how many iterations it's going to take to get to it. So kind of back to the old Tootsie Roll, how many licks does it take to get to the center? You may never know. So we know we're going to have at least one iteration. We're probably going to have two, but this part right here, this dot, dot, dot means I don't know how many are going to show up here. I have iterations with an S. It could be one more iteration. It could be 20 more iterations. I guess it depends on how many items of the user stories are sitting in the backlog waiting to be completed and what the capacity for the team is to complete them. If you've got 20 tasks to complete and you've got a team of 100, you might only have iteration 1 or 2. If I have 100 tasks, but 2 people working on it, this iteration process, you could have a lot more going forward in that particular piece. So I think that's what's nice about Agile. Glenda or Professor Dilts, do you want to talk about when you know your project is done from an Agile perspective?
From an Agile perspective, we can have multiple dones because we can deliver a project that can be used. And then we can go ahead and make enhancements to that project. So done can be a never, or done can be repeated. But we try with Agile project management to get something that can be used and then build onto it and build onto it. And when we're meeting the required needs of the users, that's when we're finished.
Yeah, so I'm guessing if you're working on like lessons plans or something like that, you're probably never done with your lesson plan. You're probably always tweaking it as questions come up. So you can present your lesson as it is, and then as the feedback comes in, you might be making additional changes. So the next time you teach it, it looks a little bit different than the other one. And I do that from a college perspective. I'm sure it works across all teaching. That I've taught the same class, which is PHP development, since 2002. And if I look back at it, it's a constantly changing, ever evolving lesson and projects that are put into it. And a lot of it's based on the feedback and the reviews, the internal review that I do of it after each one. So I guess that would be an Agile lesson planning, maybe. So, okay, so let's go ahead and test your buttons out. So this is not animated. You know, there's no cool things we have here. We don't have a tool that allows you just to go do this. So you're going to have to, we're going to trust you on your honor that you have the ability to manipulate that. So if we start our player on the right-hand side, we need to get the player over here, or the left-hand side, we need to get the player to the right-hand side. So on your control pad, do you have the ability to move your player from left to right? Hopefully you have either a button or a control pad or a joystick or something to make that happen. If you don't, then we probably would have to mark that as a failed test and have you go back to the drawing board as per se, and to make a new controller, or at least modify it so that you can move your player from left to right. Now there's an accessory here. Do you have the ability for that player to pick up the accessory? My guess is it probably wouldn't be another control stick unless maybe you push down. You'd have to figure out what that particular piece is, but maybe you have a button that allows you to pick up your accessory. Now we reached an obstacle, which means we cannot keep moving forward, or from left to right in this case. We need a way to get around this obstacle. There's a couple different ways you can do. You can jump over, you can climb over, you can use this accessory to do something with it, but you have to have a way now to make that action happen. So you can't use this, can't cheat and use the same button you used for the other ones. Do you have another button that allows you to climb or jump? Did you have a button that allowed you to pick up your accessory? And if so, then do you have another button that allows you to use that accessory to navigate around the obstacle? So that would be your next test. Was I able to accomplish that one? And once I get back down, now, so if I got the ability to move up, you know, maybe you push up on your joystick, does that also allow you to move to the right, or do you have to have another? And then you have to have the control, the ability to go down. So the ability to move the user up, across, left, or right would be one particular piece. We get to another obstacle. So we would probably want to have probably the same actions for that first particular one. And then if we get that far, now we got all the way to the villain. And the villain's not going to let you just easily just kind of walk around them or jump over them. You need to do something with that particular villain. So maybe you run fast and plow into them. Maybe you attack them. Maybe you use one of these accessories. Maybe you teleport them to a different dimension or whatever you're going to do. But do you have now a button that allows you to engage and interact with that villain so that you can complete the process and get all the way over here to the right-hand side? So if you have something in chat, yeah, so we got somebody saying we're going to throw a fireball at them. So hopefully you have a button that allows you to throw a fireball, and that button is different than your jump, unless you're going to jump and throw a fireball every single time. Maybe that's your button. Jump and throw fireballs. That would be kind of one of those cool ones. So anybody else want to have anything they want to throw in the chat and think, was it successful? Did you realize you missed something? And while you're putting those items in chat, this is your testing process. This is the end of the sprint that we would say, okay, we now have a game that people can play. Oh, so Marnie forgot to pick something up. A lot of people forgot to picking up. Somebody has a laser beam. That's kind of cool. So laser beam might be able to destroy the obstacle and destroy the villain. So maybe you can, in the case, kill two birds with one stone. If that's maybe her villain's a bird. But so anyway, this would be your testing phase, and we get the students to this particular point, and they realize, okay, I put some thought into it, but I didn't put as much thought as I need to into it, or I kind of did it half-heartedly, which now I realize that it's a waste because now I have to go back. So if students are not putting their full effort in early on, they have to go back. It's not a good feeling to know that I have to go back and make some changes to something. But hopefully they were far enough through the process that they can make those changes quickly and move on to the various piece of it. So, so Corey's got more design than function. So it probably looks very pretty, but it's probably got one big button in the middle, like the easy button for maybe for the staples or something like that. And that doesn't work, Corey. You're not allowed to do that. So,
but I do have a question as far as, like, okay, so I've got a cooling and a fan, like a fan piece on it. Okay, so I'm not very good at the picking up the accessory piece. but I wonder, when you have students kind of put things together, if they work together and can they take, hey, I like that of your joystick and I like that of your joystick. Do you guys ever do that in class? Is that something that works well for this project-based learning?
Yeah, and almost all of our classes have some concept of collaboration or group learning or teamwork, because that's an important piece of what we teach here at Grand Canyon. And again, that goes back to what Professor Dilts mentioned, that our advisory boards tell us that students need to come in and understand what it's like to be on a team, how to interact with a team, how to deal with the nuances that come in with it, with people not carrying their weight, people wanting to do all the work. So yeah, so we encourage our students, and for this particular exercise, because of our COVID environment, and we realize pretty much everyone's kind of in their own room working on these things, but these projects work best when you're all in the same room and you can collaborate and work together and go, okay, my joystick does this, what did yours do? What kind of things did you make? Or somebody might create an obstacle that you never thought of because they're putting their own spin on it, and when you try to test it from that perspective, you realize, oh, I can't jump over it because it's the Empire State Building. I'm going to have to find a way to get through it or around it in a way that I was not prepared to handle. So it does actually kind of expand their knowledge and their experiences to see what other people come up with for the various components. And that's the same thing that's going to happen in the working world, is that those user stories can be interpreted many different ways. And how you interpret it might not be the way that your team member or maybe even the project manager was envisioning. So you have to be cognizant of what's happening and take that into consideration. So.
And yes, we would want the teams to talk, and of course, if you deliver a game, you're going to deliver a joystick. And that joystick needs to have the capabilities to do everything that can get through this set of obstacles. So we would need to have that connection between our players, our designers.
I think it's fascinating. And Karen has a pro tip here. She added a touch screen with drag and drop capabilities. So Karen, bravo. Definitely, we got to get my cooling abilities with your touch screen. We're going to have one heck of a joystick here. I have to say, I just think kids would love this. And you mentioned, yes, it's great to get kids together. So I think in a virtual environment, we have to be very intentional about getting kids to have these conversations and sharing their joysticks and sharing their design and functionality. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and we actually have the students hold up on the camera, depending on the size of the class, to show what they worked on. Sometimes it's a little harder because not everyone has cameras. But yes, we do want to share. It's a great tool to allow people to share and interact with each other.
And those Trello boards are shareable too. So
Yes.
that's really key. Well, I know that I'm robbing your time, so go keep going, and we'll get kind of through so we can have some Q&A at the end.
Yeah. So we're actually very close to wrapping up this particular piece. So be honest. Did your controller work? If it is, we can move it over to the completed side. If not, we might have to go work in progress. But we can move it either way depending on what particular pieces happen. So be honest with it on that particular piece. So we would then review our user stories. Did we complete all of our user stories? Did we prove it through the testing? Did our testing show that our user stories were valid representations of what we needed to accomplish? So again, this would be something we would do as a group. We would sit down and say, okay, were we successful? And the last thing you do, and this is probably something you probably miss out on, a lot of people don't do this when they finish up a project, but it's a very important piece, is to kind of go through and how did it all go? This, whether you call it an autopsy, a retrospective, a review, a debrief, whatever you want. What was frustrating? What did I need more information about? What do I need less instruction? What was I excited to complete? What left some questions in my head that I still need to get through? But no matter what you're doing from a project perspective, whether it's Agile, Waterfall, or whatever, or some project you're working on, it's definitely worth your time to go through when you're done with everything and kind of put your thoughts down so that next time, and there's going to be a next time, that you can make it a little easier on yourself. So, that was kind of the thing. Like I said, we share this with high school students. We share it with students on campus. Professor Dilts and I have presented this to the PMI Institute here in Phoenix to show how we're trying to teach our students to understand the Agile methodology, and it's built into all of our classes. So here at Grand Canyon, we're looking to bring anyone from an entry-level worker all the way through the career path. So we have programs in cybersecurity. We have our certificate programs to allow them to get into the workforce pretty quickly, then get their bachelor's, move into management, go to their master's level, all the way up to the doctoral level. Same thing with programming. And this is focusing on the technology side of it, but we can bring somebody that has no experience, get them to the point where they can be a programmer, developer in 16 weeks, and then hopefully that student continues their education, gets their bachelor's degree, moves into management, and maybe all the way through their master's program. So we give everybody who has an opportunity and wants to learn, we've got a path to get them to where they need to be. So that's an important part, the reason I'm working here at Grand Canyon. So with that, I will turn it back over. I will stop sharing and we'll turn it back over to Corey.
Wow, thank you both so much. This has been quite the education in project management. And I think, honestly, project management is one of those kind of challenging thoughts, I think, for a lot of teachers, because it seems like a lot of work. But what I find interesting is that you both took a lot of work, you broke it down into small chunks using either a Trello board, which is kind of what you showed, but essentially saying, what do I have to do? What are we currently doing? What have I done? What needs to be redone? I mean, it sounds simple, again, Professor Dilts, but it can be complicated, right? So as we talk a little bit about our GCU Live and custom PD sessions that you all have access to for free, I just want you to think about that, Professor Dilts, because that'll be my question is, how do you get kids to actually simplify this? Does it require giving them that really specific template, or just think about what your challenges are, because I'd like to ask you that.
With this one though, we have simplified this, but our students play games, and we can ask them what makes a good game, and what makes an interesting story, what makes a good controller, and they can tell us, and they can build those things that need to happen in order to create a good game. We don't have to come in with all this stuff pre-written.
Fantastic. So depend on them. And as Marnie put in the chat there, reflection is where that learning happens. So that's pretty amazing. Thank you so much for that piece. And stick around because folks, we're going to have some live Q&A with Professor Dilts and Professor Lloyd. For now, I want to just let you know that you can bring your students. We have an Agile project management. You can do this with your students. We encourage you to do so. We put the GCU Live lesson link into the chat, and we've got this Agile project management. Also, the front end software development is the Magic 8 Ball. This is a fun activity that Professor Loy is involved with. And as well, we have engineering GCU Live lessons. So the online circuit development. I've been through that. It's absolutely fantastic. And there's a lot of mathematics in it that is fun math. So definitely give that a shot. Hopefully today you became familiar with Agile methodology illustrated by this game project, and that you learned how to track requirements in your game controller, implement a story using iteration, and test your results. So hopefully you did those 3 things today. And there's so much more that we offer for free here at Grand Canyon University. Make sure that you take advantage of it. I definitely want you to evaluate our webinar today so that you can earn that PD certificate. We always ask, Marnie, as we do in every webinar, what's your takeaway? So I know I asked some questions. I talked about design and function, and Marnie, she's got a fireball rolling. So we had some questions and some takeaways. What are your takeaways? I'm going to ask everyone who's on the call to just put something in the chat, if you don't mind. What's your one takeaway from this project management webinar? And Marnie, please feel free to jump in and ask a different question if you'd like to get their minds rolling. But we want to know, what did you take away from today?
Yeah, as I was thinking about this and thinking about the teachers we have online with us today, like thinking, okay, great, this is a fun game. It looks like a game, but how does this relate to a project in class? It might be have a writing project, that I have in class. That's writing, it's not video games, but if you can start to think about your writing project in little parts and actually turn it into a game for your students, just think about how much more engaged they will be if they can actually visualize, all right, when I, get this part, this research part done, what's the obstacle? I have to look at the obstacle. Does my whatever I've written get me past that obstacle? And actually creating some kind of game board for, something that may not be as fun for them. Oh, I like it. Yeah, so we said project management with the small details. I do like that.
And I think all of it, around the week, honeydews on the weekend, you have these projects you need to do, and they're always intimidating because you don't even know what you have to do to get it complete. If you just spend a couple of minutes and go, okay, I need to go to Home Depot, I need to go here, I need to come home and do this kind of stuff, it makes it a little more manageable. I know that's how I get through the weekends.
Yeah, the honey-do list. I'm going to tell my husband, hey, if you're using a Trello board, it's not too difficult.
There you go. Trello. Everybody should be using Trello boards and keep track of stuff they have to work on.
Like Martha was just saying, her high school students are about to start. And by the way, hi, Martha. We're big fans of her. About on a 6-week project. So this is great tools right now to get started. And I love it.
This is great. And Karen talked about her 11-year-old son will be proud of her game controller. Hey, I agree, Karen. Let's get our 12-year-olds to really help us, with some of these ideas that we need the vision and the creativity and the imagination for. Sometimes we lose our imagination as we get older and bogged down in lesson plans and objectives, etc. So thank you so much, you guys, for popping in your takeaway. Please continue to do that. While you're putting your takeaways in, I want to also let you know that next month, we'd love for you to join us on October 28th. We're going to be talking specifically about transitioning in-person to online courses. So it's kind of a curriculum development side. This is for teachers who are really doing some blended learning and need some extra help. And what do kids look at first, second, third? Our partners, Orbis, who work with Grand Canyon Education, are going to be here. They are experts in this field, and they're going to be talking about transitioning courses. So don't miss it. Again, it's 12 to 1, your lunch hour here. Then in December, we're going to look at small group instruction with primary students. So if you know elementary teachers, definitely tell them to mark the calendar December 2nd. And then we're going to gear up for that spring semester with some teacher self-care, January 13th, some real good tips on motivation. And then we're going to just ask for your topics. So what topics would you like to see us present here in one of our monthly webinars? please don't forget that we do this because we want to empower, educate, and inspire you, our community, so that you take action to fulfill your purpose and to serve others.